Hi everyone, I hope you're well. So today I wanted to make a book tag, but I thought these questions were pretty interesting. This is the no disclaimers book tag, and unfortunately the person who originally made this tag, I don't think they have a channel anymore, or at least they don't go by the same name, but they were Catalyst Reads. And the video of their tag, their first tag, is no longer available. So the first question is, which trope or tropes in books annoy you the most? I don't actually have a very specific answer for this. I feel like most of the books that I read almost seem to make an effort to not make use of that many tropes, or at least tropes that could be considered overused or cliched. And I don't think that tropes are necessarily bad or annoying by themselves. There are some that do kind of, when they're completely played straight, and nothing is subverted or nothing is changed, I feel like that kind of does get kind of annoying, especially if you have read it before. In romance, I do think there are things that immediately make a book much less enjoyable, at least for me, like insta-love, which kind of defeats the point of romance again, unless it's subverted, or like really forced miscommunication, or that sort of push and pull that happens a lot of the times in sort of hate to love romances, where a couple will keep fighting about stuff and then will keep getting back together. I also sometimes feel like in general fiction or literary fiction, there are times where the plot twists don't work, and not like plot twists are necessarily a trope. I would say they're somewhat of a trope. Not a cliche, of course, because I don't think something like that can be cliched, but because it's just a tool, a part of, I mean, tropes are tools really by themselves. I think plot twists sometimes just don't work. Sometimes they either come out of nowhere, or there are stuff that you could have inferred but that wasn't really foreshadowed enough, or it's not really justified by the rest of the stories. Like sometimes I feel like sometimes plot twists are put in stories to make it more impactful for the reader, or to make the reader shocked and therefore be more likely to give it a higher rating because they were somehow emotionally affected by a story, if you will, even if they don't necessarily think it's a good story. I mean, and really that thing about using shock for, I guess, to have higher ratings, I don't know, I do feel like it's somewhat of a phenomenon, but it also deserves to be more discussed more, because I do think it's something that happens, but it's not necessarily the case with all shocking media that it's going to be made just for the shock itself, or what have you. It could just be a good story. Sometimes it can be both a shocking story and a good story, or sometimes it's really just one of the two. You know how it is. Second one is also a pretty difficult question for me. Which writer or writers do you feel are overrated or overhyped? And the reason why this is so difficult for me is because I rarely read more than one book of the same author, and generally when I don't like an author that much, I don't really read another one of their books, not because I'm avoiding them or because I don't want to read anything by them again, but because if I think an author was kind of mediocre on a certain book, I'm more likely to pick up other authors in order to discover new things, as opposed to trying to give the same author a second chance, which I also will do sometimes. But I do want to mention one just because it's kind of a recent read, and maybe some of you will really not like the fact that I'm going to mention this one. My pick is Erin Morgenstern. And even though I do feel like it's a bit unfair for me to say this, but I feel like this style in general, not really just her specifically, but this type of style, I feel like it's overrated as a whole, because it's basically a style that's telling you what everything is supposed to be interpreted as. It wants you to interpret things in a certain way. In this case, everything is described to you, everything is told to you as elegant, but a little bit creepy, or as elegant and this other thing, and maybe a little bit morbid and dark, and that, I'm not talking about that's the impression that you get from the book. I'm talking about the fact that those are the exact phrases that are being used in the book in order to tell you how to interpret the atmosphere and the characters and how they dress and all these things. And I don't mind an atmospheric read, even though that's not really my favorite. I said that in my review for The Bloody Chamber and Other Stories. A lot of those stories are kind of atmospheric, as people call them, but I don't think they have this style. At least in my interpretation, they don't really have this style that, in my opinion, is kind of low effort because of that, because it's telling you how to interpret those things. I mean, everything is described to you, not because, and my problem is not that it's described in detail. I mean, that's not my preference either, because it sometimes interrupts the story as opposed to being part of the story when you just describe everything in full detail, when it doesn't really tell you anything about the story or the setting or the world or the characters or anything. Which I think is the case for this as well. Even characters are described in a way that is very similar to each other, and objects and places, they are basically the same thing over and over. Like, they're all a slight bit dark, but also kind of creepy and elegant. You know, all these people are like really elegant London people who have a sort of like goth feel to them, but they're also like sort of Victorian goth, if you will. Like, that's the vibe that you're obviously supposed to get from it. And I say obviously because that's basically what the author is telling you. The author, or the narrator, if you will, is telling you, hey, this is Victorian Goth, like that's how you should interpret this. And I think that also works against the characters because they're all described in the same manners, you know, everyone is also described in the same elegant but dark way, and it basically makes them all blend into each other. And I'm talking about this author because I've also read reviews of some of her more recent books. I think not sure if this is her first novel, but her most recent one, I think it's called The Starless Sea, and I've seen reviews of this book, and it seems that this one has the exact same style and the exact same problem with storytelling, where she kind of interrupts the story in order to give a lot of detail. And I know that some people's preference is that, but I feel like that sort of style is taken as if it was inherently much better than a simpler style. And it's not like I necessarily prefer a simpler style, but there are simple styles that are saying a lot in fewer words than styles like that one, for example. I hope you can hear that there's people below this floor and they are talking very loudly. But number 3 is, what are your least favorite books you've read since joining BookTube? So I obviously have a lot of them. Most of them I did make a dedicated review on: The Night Circus, Little Fires Everywhere, 99% Mine, of course, the most recent one. And there's one that I read at the beginning of this year that I didn't want to make a dedicated review on because, for one, I don't know how to say this, but there was something kind of embarrassing about me admitting that I even picked this book up to read. I mean, not because it's romance, but because of another thing that you'll probably notice. And also because I didn't want to give this book more attention than it really deserves. It's not a very well-known book, and it's kind of niche, and it's not very recent either, so, you know, it's just not very popular, and I don't want to, and it's not, I mean, I have less than 100 subscribers, so, you know, there's nothing to really promote in this book that would make much of a difference, but I still didn't want to make a whole dedicated review on it. Also because, like I said, it makes me feel dirty even just thinking about it or talking about it. And the book is Honor Bound by Sandra Brown. I think at the time she wrote it under the name Erin Sinclair. And the book is not just bad, okay? I mean, it's a romance novel. It's a romance novel that is contemporary to its time, so it's from the 80s, but it was set in the 80s. And for the most part, the writing and generally the romance and everything is mostly just below average, really. But there is one thing that really bothers me about this book, and that's the fact that it is so racist. And I don't know how to go about this because I feel like a broken record in a way. I mentioned something very similar to this when I was talking about 50 Shades of Grey and how I felt like it was doing this thing of portraying Mexican men as rapists. And I feel like this book is basically doing the same thing, but with Native American men. And there's something about it. So this book is set in the 80s in Arizona. It is a romance again about a Navajo man and a white woman. The guy he escaped from prison at the beginning of the story, and basically, to give you the spark notes of the story, he kidnaps her because he finds it convenient at the moment. Basically, he wants to use her resources at her home, basically sleep at her home and stuff, because he just escaped and he has nowhere else to go at the moment or whatever. And for one, the premise itself, I don't really like to judge a book by its premise, but the premise of this book is already really, really flawed. Because in a book set in the 1980s, to have Native American man kidnap a white woman, like that doesn't make sense in the context, you know, like there's no, I'm not sure if the Navajos even ever did that at any point. I mean, they might have. I think the Apaches did, the Comanches, but the Navajos, I don't even know. Anyways, the point is, the fact that he kidnaps her doesn't make any sense. Why would he risk potentially a life imprisonment sentence after he gets caught by kidnapping a woman? And also there's some states where you can get the death penalty for that. And also he escaped like a month before he was set to be released. Like it doesn't make any sense that he would risk so much by kidnapping her, especially because here's the thing, he also forces her to strip and then forces her to sleep beside him naked. And these are the things that really bother me about this book. That's not the only like sexually aggressive thing he does, and the whole portrayal of him as a Navajo man in this story doesn't make any sense. I mean, I understand that it's a romance novel, and honestly the premise is kind of the least of my problems, because like I said, the way that he's portrayed is kind of my main problem in this story. And as a whole, I mean, the writing style is not really anything special. It doesn't really subvert anything. Like I said, it doesn't even subvert the idea of like the, you know, native man kidnapping and I guess raping a white woman or whatever. It doesn't even subvert that, and it's just kind of taking this idea and placing it in the 1980s for no reason. And I know that these books are meant for entertainment or whatever, but there's something about this that again just almost feels malicious. And I know that it's also like a common theme among these bodies reapers from this time, that they would have a really violent man fall in love with the heroine of the story, and her also falling in love with him after he's violent to her or whatever. Like I know it was a thing in the 80s, but one, I don't have to like it, and two, I think when you make it about a brown man or, you know, native Mexican or black man raping a white woman specifically, I mean, maybe think more about what you're doing as an author. Like, what are you trying to get with this? Like, what's the reader supposed to take from that? I'm not saying that you're not allowed to do things. I mean, at the end of it all, you can write whatever you want, but maybe question yourself as an author too. And aside from that, I mean, even in literary terms, this whole idea just doesn't make any sense. So it's just a bad book in all possible ways. Next one is a terrible ending that ruined an otherwise quality book. And for this, I have not a very good answer, not a very, you know, specific answer. Usually when I don't like a book's ending, I have other issues with the book as well. And generally, when I do like a book as a whole, I don't tend to have anything particularly against the ending, or I like it, or I think, you know, it makes sense. So there's one book that kind of does spring to mind, and it's really just a coincidence that this just happens to be about Native Americans as well, but this was actually written by a Native American. So this is There by Toni Orange, and the ending doesn't ruin it exactly. I still gave it 4 stars, which is very high for me. But the thing is that I felt, like I said in my review, I felt it was kind of rushed, but now I give it more of an importance than I did back then. I think that back then I just thought it was kind of rushed, and now that I look back at it, the style itself almost seems to change. There are some emotional aspects that are touched upon near the ending after what happens, or before what happens, but some other aspects of it are just kind of like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened, and then this happened, and a couple of other things were, you know, were described or were narrated, and then the book was pretty much over after that. There's this general idea or this general advice that is often given to writers regarding endings, which is that you should finish, Jesus Christ, the Mexican accent, that you should finish, like, erase the last paragraph of your ending. Like, you write it and then you take the whole thing and erase it. And I guess there are authors who would benefit from that advice, but I think maybe Toni Orange took it a little bit too hard, because it seems like he backspaced on like 5 paragraphs and then just wrote a last paragraph to serve as the very ending one. And it's not really the worst ending I've ever read, but I feel like it is the one aspect that keeps it from being a 4.5 or 5-star read. The ending, I feel like it could have been a bit better or not feel as rushed. Maybe if the style had been a bit different towards the end, or hadn't felt as strange compared to the rest of the book, I feel. And I saw that a lot of people had an issue with the fact that it had so many characters, and apparently they couldn't keep up with that many. But I feel like it was actually a very impressive aspect of this book, the fact that it has so many characters, and yet I feel like I was able to remember who was who and remember all of their, or generally their personality and their problems and all these things. Number 5 is, what fictional characters do you wish were not killed off? I feel like it's kind of hard to talk about books where you would have rather not have a character die or something, because sometimes those characters dying are what makes a book what it is. But there are some situations where I feel like it wasn't really necessarily the best choice for the story, or I just personally didn't like it. And something that is maybe a bit more personal is Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I think in this case, what I don't like is the fact that I think I already have said before that this book, I just find it really, really depressing. And of course, it's just part of what it is and what it's about and the context of the book. But at the same time, I feel like it goes a little too far in having the main character, suffer all the time and have everyone around her die or betray her. She has basically just one best friend at the end, and she's kind of hated by a lot of, not necessarily hated, but the whole community gossips about her and they don't respect her, and even all of her previous husbands that she's had have mistreated her or have initially seemed nice but then have become terrible or abusive. The thing is that I'm going to give you spoilers, of course, right now for this book. Near the end, the last love interest for the main character dies of rabies, and the main character is basically forced to kill him because he obviously has become dangerous and can kill her too. And that is after so many situations where she's had to leave someone, or someone has left her, or someone has betrayed her, or all these things happening in the story that just it seems for most of the story that she just can't have a break, that she can just have anything good happen to her. And it's I know a depressing book, obviously, and I have read other books that I would say are depressing, but I feel like this one kind of gets a little too far in not wanting the main character to have anything good in her life. And I do understand that that's part of what the book is about, but I do feel like having Tea Cake die was a bit too much. Maybe it was part of the story. I mean, I do have to admit it's probably part of what the story is and what it's about, but at some point it kind of does start to feel like it's the same tragedy happening over and over in the story, and it's not even that long of a book, that large of a book, so it kind of does feel a bit repetitive because of all these bad things happening and them all seeming so similar to each other. Number 6 is, what are some of your bookish pet peeves? And I do have to repeat that, pet peeve is small things that, you probably shouldn't even be complaining about because they're really, really small things. But I do want to mention something that is kind of funny to me, and honestly, I'm not complaining. I mean, I guess I am complaining, but it's a pattern that I have noticed lately where a lot of fantasy titles, or YA fantasy or high fantasy titles, have to have the title format of a X of Y and Z, like A Court of Thorns and Roses, An Enchantment of Ravens, A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, A Breath of Snow and Ashes, something and something else, I do believe it was the saga or the series of Game of Thrones, or what is it called? I think it's called A Song of Ice and Fire, that started this, or maybe just made it popular. But I think it's kind of strange, don't you think? Because why would authors want to make their books seem generic? And even, I mean, obviously there are always trends in all genres, and I feel like these trends always help to make books, or the works of an author, it helps in a way to make them more market friendly, because you see something that kind of looks like something else that you also like, and you might be more likely to buy it. But at the same time, don't you think it also has a bit of an opposite effect, where people start to see these trends and it kind of turns them off? Because of course, if you see something and it looks like everything else you've ever seen, it's going to look kind of generic, and some people are going to be turned off precisely because of that. And I also do understand that authors aren't necessarily the people who decide what the cover is going to look like, or what the title even maybe is going to look like. The title is going to be. Number 7 is, what are some books you feel should have more recognition? And I want to mention one that I haven't talked about in a while, which is Other Weapons by Luisa Valenzuela. And that, I'm not sure honestly if you can easily find a PDF of the translation of that. But I just remember being really impressed by it when I read it in college. And it has a really, really good writing style, that the kind of style that makes you think, why didn't I think of this, or I wish I had written that myself, you know. Not just because it's kind of literary or creative, but because it also seems to portray precisely the kind of emotions that readers have felt before and that you probably are familiar with. And that sometimes you think words can't really describe those things, but sometimes the words can actually describe those things. Number 8 is kind of a strange question, because it's, what are your thoughts on censorship in banning books? And it's really strange. I don't really know what to make of this. I feel like every tag that I've seen has had the same answer, which is that it's obviously bad to ban books and censorship is bad. I mean, why would you expect someone to be like, actually censorship is good and banning books is good? Even books that are objectively bad, if you will, or they have bad messages that nobody should agree with, those books, I mean, still serve some purpose. Like, this is exactly kind of arguments that don't make sense or don't work, or this is exactly the kind of thing that would harm or has harmed humanity before. So, you know, I feel like I'm saying kind of a cookie cutter answer by saying that obviously censorship is bad, but yeah, I feel like it doesn't really make any sense. And number 9 is, who do you tag? And I tag anyone who wants to make the tag. I mean, I'm not sure how many booktubers follow me, or which of you watching are booktubers yourselves, but if you are interested in these questions, which I personally did find pretty interesting because I couldn't find very specific and good answers for them, they kind of made me really look at what I was reading, then you should make this video. I tag you to make this video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.